planning application, where I believe most of the spectators are here, watchers, so we deal with that first. And then we will go back to the rest of the agenda. So just to pick up on that, very statutory notes I need to read. Obviously, we've had a fire alarm earlier in the day. That was before the original committee should be held. So on the basis of that, if you do hear a fire alarm, please leave the building, congregate at the front of the building, where we will prep for all people, because it won't be a trial test, it will be a real occasion. Water is available in places, and there is some sanitising items back of the room. So the ventilation is as best we can make it. Having said that, we are going to deal with the application first for the building. It doesn't imply that we're going to take any speed with it, deal with it in the correct amount of time, in the correct the committee feels necessary. So just a couple of comments. Officers in the room. Robert Post is the Democratic Services Officer. Jan Gibson's Programme Leader on the Highways issues. Arthur Rees is legal. Neil McBride, Head of Planning, is here. Mark Will is the Applications Manager. And also, I think, joining us via remote access will be Mark Abbott, CEO of Acting Resources, speaking to 5.1. Councillor will be talking to the highways issue a little bit later. Something that was circulated on Friday 11th. Members were informed that further representations have been made. 1135 signatures have been received with it. And at the rising of this meeting, there is going to be a trip to the Bailgate to look at the traffic issues down there. If anybody is attending that, in order to make that work more efficiently, I've organised that transport will be available from here to the Vale and to bring you back, rather than to walk, to make everything a little bit more efficient. So if you're intending to go on the Vale, please put your hand up now so we can do a quick head count. So we've got a number to work to. Okay, thank you. So item 1 is apologies for absence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've received apologies from councillors Newton, Austin and Hall. Very waiting for me.
Item 2 is declarations of interest. Members can declare at this stage or at any point during the meeting. I will make a global declaration that with regard to the application 6.1, I've received a collection of the emails, but the ones that come to mind are Bob Tubman, Neil Allen, Tim Grigg, and Amanda Sotheby, Mary Cummins, Jess Stratford, Maggie Adams, that come immediately to mind. Okay, item 3.
Chairman,
yes.
I have a declaration of interest, and I'm obviously the local candidate. I also work for Sherwood, but I have not had any communication from Sherwood on the matter at 5.1. I have received emails and many meetings. I haven't expressed an opinion, but I have obviously replied to emails from residents on the subject. But I am impartial and with an open mind.
Thank you. Councillor Captain.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, with reference to item 5.1, the committee report makes reference to the emerging 5-year revision draft of the Central Lincolnshire Local Plan. In the interest of transparency, I declare that I am a member of the Central Lincolnshire Joint Strategic Planning Committee. However, I do not believe that the emerging draft has any weight in planning terms this time when I come to this meeting.
Thank you. I'll make a similar declaration. I'm also a member of that committee. Anybody else? Okay, so item 3 then is minutes of the previous meeting. The previous meeting was the 14th of February. These have been circulated. I'm quite prepared to move them. This was seconded in brief. Thank you, Councillor Smith. Does anybody want to dissent from that? Seeing no dissenters, I will therefore take it that those are. So I will therefore move on rapidly to 5.1, which is the very condition 1, condition 3, planning application 141306. And that to the east of Smithfield Road, North Kelsey Runoff, community resources. So,
Mr. Chairman, just as a point of clarification, the actual report is for the two applications. So it's the one that the Chairman's just mentioned, and there's also within the same report an application for various conditions 1 and 2 of Planning Commission 141307. So that these reports are, so both these applications are incorporated into this one committee report. So this, as an introduction, both applications seek to amend the date by which the restoration of the two sites need to be completed, and the exploratory application also seeks an amendment to the direction of drilling to secure an optimum bottom hole target location within the North Kelsey prospect. Principles of both the development subject to these applications have been established, and consequently the key issue in front of the committee today is in these cases is to consider if the proposed extension of time and revised direction of drilling would materially change the effects on amenity since the grant of these permissions. In considering these applications, it is acknowledged that the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic have contributed to the delays in securing contracts and services across many areas of industry and continued beyond the initial expectation of how long the pandemic would last. So we can go to the presentation. So the presentation is more for background, as the issue before the committee today are to really look at the request of the applicant for the extension of the time period, but just to set the context as to where the two applications are situated. So the plan on this screen there shows the application site. Sure how well you can see in the bottom corner there, but I know that you've all seen the presentation being circulated to you all on Friday, so hopefully you are aware and familiar with this plan to show where the geographical location of these two applications are. Next slide, please. This slide shows the access point from the highway into the site, and as you can see, the access has been constructed. The first part of the access has been constructed, which secured the implementation of permissions. Next slide, please. This is looking along the road, and you can see that there's also part of those initial implementations that button places were installed along the carriageway. Slide, please. And again, at the junction, the road again is slightly widened as a requirement of the original planning permission for the exploratory drilling. Slide, please. This just helps a little bit in terms of showing the actual application site. So from the earlier slides, you saw the start of the access point. This takes us a bit further into the site and looking across to the areas which will be first one in the foreground is the area of the security compound, and then behind that is the well site itself. Slide, please. Again, just a view from just off the road, and again see the sites where they're identified on that photo, the security compound and the well site. Slide, please. Okay, so that's the presentation completed. So if I can draw your attention to the committee report. The report sets out in detail the conditions which are sought to be amended in the first section of the report. So looking at from paragraph 1 through to paragraph 6, the conditions that are sought to be amended are set out there for both applications. To give you an idea of what the original conditions said and the reasons for those conditions. Paragraph 7 then sets out the reasons for why paragraph 8 sets out the reasons for the extension of time, and that is applicable to both applications. Move through the report, paragraphs 21 to 24 set out the extensive representation that has been received from the local community and also from the various statutory constituencies. That we intend to go through those that are clearly set out in the report. Then moving on into the conclusions, and I particularly draw your attention to paragraph 27 in the conclusion section. This sets out the assessment the committee is required to make of these applications. The committee is only looking at the acceptability or not of the conditions which are seeking amendment, not the entire development. So again, just to clarify, the committee is looking at whether it's acceptable to allow extension of time on both these applications and for the slight amendment of the target reservoir on the first application. For completeness, the report does go through in some detail the representations that have been received for the various planning aspects to give you some context and to provide a response to those issues that have been pressed or been raised by the local community and an assessment of those issues that have been raised. So, the chairman mentioned at the start of the meeting that the update that was circulated on Friday were a couple of extra additions to the report in terms of comments that have been received from the Council Collection of Rural England. Again, I won't read those out. They're set out in the update. Confirmation that Sir Edward Lee MP has drawn officers' attention to representations that have been made on behalf of his constituents. They're included in the report. You'll see my response to the issues that are raised, particularly by the CPRE. And finally, in relation to local residents, a petition has been submitted. Timely update was put together with 1,155 signatures, requesting that the County Council protect the landscape and end the local community's years of anxiety by rejecting the applicant's proposal to explore for oil for Kelsey. So, bringing that all together, the recommendation is in two parts. To capture both applications, and the recommendation is that planning permission be granted for both applications subject to the conditions set out in Annex B, Annex C, respectively. Chairman, I'd ask that when we get to the vote, that we do one for each application, so that it's clear that there's a specific brief. That's my introduction.
Thank you very much. So next we will have Amanda Sotheby, the representative speaking on behalf of local residents, those community groups, 2 3 minutes to address the committee. Sorry,
I think I'll be up to 6 minutes.
Sorry,
Chairman.
6 minutes.
Maybe a little bit slow because we don't have
That's the
project.
Thank you.
7 years and 8 different applications, 28 conditions. But still no real work has even begun. 7 years of anxiety for local people to whom this development will bring no benefit. And now another disingenuous claim that COVID has caused the delay. Please be clear, Egdon do not need time to complete work because they have never attempted to start. The 7-year delay has been of their making, and they have used it to expand the project through numerous variations. You have received objections from 7 councils, 150 individuals, 3 public groups and nearly 1,200 petitioners. There is no social license for this scheme. Our concerns are numerous, from the many adverse impacts on our well-being, amenity, local economy and environment, to the climate and ecological crisis, and importantly, the credibility of Egdon's expanding plans and shifting deadlines. This committee previously observed that the delays were becoming unacceptable, and this new deadline is unrealistic. Egdon told you they needed a 3-year window to allow for contingencies, and it was granted twice. Now they're claiming that 49 weeks is a worst-case scenario. Both cannot be true. They will have only 52 weeks for this 49-week project. But bird nesting has started and protected species are in the vicinity, so work shouldn't start until September unless this council agrees to waive bird protection. We hope you won't. This tight time frame also leaves no allowance for any hold-ups to equipment, staff, permits or bad weather. It is unrealistic. This is not just an extension of time, but also a last-minute change to the direction of drilling, based, we're told, on data analysis that surely should have been done years ago. Why should we believe it won't change again, creating another delay? Reports relating to traffic, ecology, flood risk and land condition are all several years out of date. Surely these should have been reassessed. A new ecological appraisal could have established a biodiversity baseline for Condition 8 before the construction phase begins. Egdon have also failed to carry out road alterations to mitigate a dangerous site access on a narrow line bend. If you're doubtful, please come see for yourselves. See our beautiful country lane, our wildlife and people going about innocent enjoyment of the countryside. See the unsafe access and the poor state of the road alterations. Horrors in the Ukraine have been seized upon by Egdon to justify this project, but there is no justification if you look at the figures. It might produce 50 to 200 barrels a day. 15 years output would produce enough oil to supply the UK for just a few hours, not even a day. 10 times less than this bill which you rejected. This is not the North Sea where more than 98% of our oil is produced. Onshore represents less than 2% of UK production, and this site would be a tiny fraction of that. And it could be 2 to 3 years before production might even begin. The possibility of finding such a small reserve of oil does not outweigh the adverse impact. The economic and security arguments fall flat. This is not sustainable development. The PM has said we must reduce our reliance on Russian oil and gas. Yes. We must rapidly steer towards renewable energy, better for the economy, planet, and our security. And during that transition, we have the North Sea. We must keep our heads and not forget that other existential crisis hammering at the door, the climate emergency. Legally enshrined commitments to reach net zero are becoming desperately more urgent. The new IPCC report is a stark reminder of that. This council has committed to its Green Master Plan and promised to lead the way. Please do not be steered off course by those who seize upon the outrage in Ukraine to promote commercial interests. Please consider policies such as R1 and DM14, which require early restoration to protect amenity and road safety. Surely the time has come to call a halt to this project now, before Egdon make any investment and before any real harm is done. We have already suffered years of uncertainty, but our country lay the field and its biodiversity are as yet unharmed. Please protect them and us. Please reject this application.
Thank you, Amanda. The next person to speak will be Mark Abbott, who is the CEO of Acton Resources, joining us from the screen at the end. You're ready.
Hello there, can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Well, good morning, Chairman and members of the committee. We're aware of the very high level of interest in this planning application and have carefully read the representations from local residents, parish and town councils, as well as those from further afield. And I'll look to address these and other points here. I'd firstly like to acknowledge and apologise for any impact that the delay in construction and drilling may have had on the small number of residents in the vicinity of the well site. We've made initial preparations to construct the well site before the summer of 2020, but as we're all sadly aware, the impact of COVID-19 and the associated restrictions meant that our plans, along with those of many others, changed significantly. In September 2020, this committee agreed an extension of time for the well to be drilled and the site restored to 31st of December of last year. At that time, we were confident that this would be sufficient. However, the second wave and the impact of Omicron inevitably impacted upon our planned operations at North Kelsey and left insufficient time for us to undertake the works. Over this period, we also re-evaluated the seismic data to verify the target location of the well in the subsurface, and that identified a better location some 700 metres to the north. The North Kelsey prospect has the potential to recover 6.5 million barrels of oil from 4 different reservoir units, some 1.8 kilometres or over a mile below ground level. Therefore, we're now proposing to drill a directional borehole steered to this location rather than the vertical well which was originally planned. Whilst there would be no change to surface activity, the additional drilling would add around 200 metres to the well bore's length. This would result in only an additional 7 to 10 cubic metres of extracted rock. So there would be no change in the approved HGV movements or the drilling timescale. As the committee report makes clear, there will be no other changes to the scheme that was carefully considered and approved by this committee in July 2019. We've agreed a comprehensive set of draft conditions with the planning officers, and before the development starts, a lighting assessment and further ecological survey will be undertaken and will carry out a biodiversity net gain assessment to deliver a minimum of 10% increase in biodiversity. There have been a number of representations questioning the need for this development in view of the transition to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Whilst great strides have been made in decarbonising the UK's energy needs, oil will continue to be needed and used up to and beyond 2050. As well as its use in transport and heating, it's an important feedstock to the petrochemical industry of Lincolnshire and the Humber region, and key to manufacturing everything from medicines to wind turbines. The government's position in respect of oil and gas is clear. Paragraph 209 of the NPPF states that it's essential that there is sufficient supply of minerals to provide the infrastructure, buildings, energy and goods that the country needs. When determining applications, the NPPF goes on to say that great weight should be given to these benefits, including to the economy. It's clear, therefore, that there remains a national need for onshore oil and gas as part of the diverse and secure energy supply. And unfortunately, this need has come into sharp focus in the past few weeks with Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the resultant sanctions on the world's third largest oil and gas producer. And while the UK only imports relatively small amounts of oil from Russia, we've seen significant increases in oil prices. And that volatility directly affects us all. We've seen rising prices at the petrol pumps, in the cost of purchasing heating oil and transportation and manufacturing. So maximising the opportunities in the UK to search for and to produce our own indigenous oil and gas is key to becoming less dependent on imports from abroad. I think that those recent events have really shown we're more reliant on producing things ourselves, be it food, goods or energy. Independent studies have also shown that indigenous UK oil supplies, such as could be present at North Kelsey, have a significantly lower carbon footprint than imported oil. The proposals at North Kelsey will enable Egdon to understand if commercial oil resources exist. If no oil is found or there are insufficient reserves, then we'll restore the site to farmland as quickly as possible. Minerals can only be worked where they are found. The location of the well site was acceptable to this committee when permission was first granted. It lies outside the Linkswold A and B, is 650 metres from the nearest residential property, is well screened by existing vegetation, which would be enhanced with additional planting. And although Smithfield Road is a single carriageway, Egdon has already made improvements, including passing places and improvements with the junction. Now that hopefully the worst of COVID is behind us, the requested extension of time will allow Egdon to complete the construction of the site and the drilling of the well. The site could contribute to meeting the government's objective of a secure, reliable, homegrown energy supply. We'll also provide support to the local economy through the use of local contractors, suppliers and services during the site works and exploratory activity. And these benefits also attract significant weight. We agree with your office that the proposals are in line with the aims and objectives of the NPPF and would not conflict with relevant policies of the core strategy, nor policy LP 226 of the Central Lincolnshire Local Plan, as the extension of time would not have an adverse impact either on amenity or on the highway network. The objections raised by West Lindsey District Council have been thoroughly addressed in the officer's report. The change in the bottom hole target location does not constitute new development, as the surface operations are all contained within the application boundary. Subsurface drilling operations are a matter for the OGA, the Environment Agency and the Health and Safety Executive, and do not constitute development. To conclude, in seeking an extension of time to complete these exploratory works, Egdon is mindful of the comments from residents and from the local parish councils. Unfortunately, the consequences of COVID have been far-reaching for us all. The principle of this development has been approved previously, with our request being for a short period of additional time to complete the works. Oil remains an important part of the UK's energy mix, and the national need for secure, homegrown energy, such as could be found at North Kelsey, have again been brought sharply into focus by the recent events in Ukraine. We therefore respectfully ask you to agree with your planning officer's recommendation and to grant planning permission subject to conditions in the officer's report. Thank you.
Also, at this stage, I need to make a declaration that I am an elected member of West Lindsey District Council. I'm a member of their planning committee, and indeed I am also the chairman of their planning committee. This application is being dealt with at County Council, and I haven't discussed the issue at West Lindsey. Okay, so the next two speakers, I have two adjoining local members, Councillor Martley and Councillor Bunning. Mr. McBride.
Sorry, Chairman. Just normally we have an opportunity for council to ask questions of the speakers.
Fair comment. Does anybody have any questions of either of the speakers so far? Mr. Smith.
Thank you. The gentleman on terrible, sorry, I've got your name, sir. I do apologise. The West Lindsey submission at point 2 on page 48 says there is a high risk of overrun for the time extension because without the introduction of sidetrack drilling, the project was predicted to take 49 weeks. We clearly requested 42 weeks. However, it says the bird nesting season is between March and August. We are in March now. How will you complete your project in a 52-week time period without coming back for further extension?
So, I mean, the initial part of the works will be to undertake the ecological survey and the biodiversity net gain part of that. So we'll have the information at that point to determine whether there are any nesting birds and species in the area at that time. If there aren't, then we would suggest that that is not a major issue to come back and ask for that. If it isn't, we would still have the time to be able to undertake this work within the 12 months period from today that is suggested. It would be tighter, but it would be possible.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Mrs. Anderson.
Yeah, just on clarification of that, how much time are you allowing? What is the minimum you actually need? You're saying that you can manage on less than 42 weeks, allowing for the birds to do their nesting and not start until September. So what is the minimum amount of work time that you actually need?
So it's around 2 to 3 months for the construction of the well site and access, which would take us through to towards the end of the year. And then to mobilise and to undertake the drilling operations is around 6 to 8 weeks.
Thank you. My first one is a different question.
Yes.
Just a different question. You talked about the change of site where you'll be digging. So you move, extracting. You've moved the area that you're working on towards the north. I think you said. So I think you're digging underground in a different direction. So what impact might that have on the surface? What impact might that have?
So it would have no impact on the surface operations at all. So effectively, the site would remain the same. The drilling operations would perhaps take 2 or 3 days additional. You drill down to around 1,000 meters vertically, and then you steer the well deep in the subsurface to that particular location. So in terms of any impact to surface, vibrations, noise, anything like that, there are no impacts.
Thank you.
Councillor Ashton, next, please.
Thank you. 2 questions, please. First of all, could you please elaborate on the reason for the commission not having been exercised previously? I appreciate that COVID is mentioned, but I'd like to understand a bit more about how and why that proved a difficulty for you to do this in the during the period of previous extension. And my other question is, what, if any, groundwork have been undertaken? What any activity has been taken on this site, if at all, please?
So dealing with the first question. So whilst movements would be possible during that period, what we've seen within our sector, like many other sectors, is a loss of capacity, pressure on the supply chains, people effectively moving out of the industry and not being replaced. So actually, you know, the delays are more in relation to actually securing contractors, materials and suppliers that meant that there were issues around that supply chain at the time. Now, that's there are still some issues and some constraints within the supply chain, but that certainly over the last 6 months has eased. So as well as the reality of operating within the restrictions that were in place, that's probably been the main impact in terms of our inability to conclude that operation during the original extension to the end of last year. It's material supply chain, contractors availability. Effectively, everybody got very busy very quickly and weren't available. Sorry, the second question, could you just remind me of that? Apologies.
The question is, what, if any, activity has been undertaken on this site as part of the extension permission?
So yeah, so the work that's been undertaken on the site has been the access and up to the access track, all of the design work, all of the environmental permits, all of that has been put in place. The site has been surveyed and tested and checked, ready to undertake the site construction.
Thank you.
My question was similar to Councillor Ashton's, but what I would like to know is what work was actually undertaken between the permission starting in 2014 and 2018, way before COVID would have had any impact? Was anything done in those first 4 years?
So those first 4 years, I think, you know, we would hold our hands up and say that we didn't progress things as quickly as we would have hoped during that time period. But work was done in terms of the subsurface work, the additional work there, securing the site and undertaking the initial operations on the access track and the road improvements.
Are there any questions of either of the two speakers? Any further questions? Nothing. Thank you very much to you two. So going to the two adjoining local members, Councillor Marfleet, Councillor Bunning. I don't know if who goes first. Councillor Marfleet, I think you're being waited.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, we're back here again with another style of application for oil drilling. I have to sort of question Egdon Resources' approach to this. In effect, they promote that they're professional, and yet here we are without a spade gone into the ground yet. The only bit of work that has been done is highways. Well, actually, highways could have done a pothole repair on that area, perhaps been in the timing, but actually, that is highways area. They haven't actually moved on to the land yet. If we were talking about housing, planning permission, actually it had fallen through by now because they wouldn't have done any groundwork. And I think this is important. I went to see the site and it is a beautiful site, actually. It really is a beautiful part of Lincolnshire. It's really rural. It's got trees and hedges. We don't have many sites like that in Lincolnshire. It's the Wolds, you can see the Wolds. It's in touching distance of the Wolds. So it's all right saying it's not in an AONB, but actually it impacts upon an AONB. And I really do think that it is rural. And that's why I sort of come right back. So 2014, cast my mind back. Ebola was the disease of the period at the time. And would you believe it? The Russians held the Olympic Games. Here we are 7 years later, with all the chaos of war. But 7 years is a very long time. And, best of all the world, if Egdon were left to run the country, we wouldn't have got very far in 7 years. And I think you've got to say, enough is enough. They've been back for another application, for another extension, and again, and again. And actually, what do? Why do we keep giving them an extension? There is a point now when you actually do have to say, you know what, enough's enough. Reject the planning this application. Say, actually, we're not granting time. And if you want to come back, we'll come back. Because actually, when you look into the CPRE report, and I think this is really valid, the planning practice guide, flexible options for planning permission clearly states that section 73 application is considered to be a new application for planning permission under the 2017 Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations, etc. And it just goes on about the sort of these two. We have not got an up-to-date screening. We are so far out from 2014 now that this application is completely out of date and not fit for modern purpose. It talks about screening option. Well, actually, go and get one. So I'll tell you what, down there, it is beautiful. And the screening option, an environmental impact assessment of 2017. Yeah, that's 5 years ago. It didn't start till 3 years later. Let's blame everything on COVID. Well, actually, yes, it had an impact to us all. But that didn't deter the 6 years before where there's nothing done. And if you actually, and throughout that time, oil prices went high and they went low. So there's no excuse. You can't say, well, it's COVID, oil prices were low. Oh, we can get labour, we can do this. They've had their time. And I think when you see this, that under this section 73 application of a new application, there is no reason why we can't just say, actually, you know what, we're not extending time anymore. Because the locals have just get bombarded. I mean, these poor guys in these communities are just left with this going on and on and on. And the bottom line is, there is no appetite for it. This is not going to influence and be a game changer for anything about oil supply. If they want proper oil, go to the North Sea, and get the supply. But this is a little pond that's actually, it's sort of no water left in it, really. And what's contribution to this to England and its oil and its power, it's not even there. So why do we therefore want to destroy a lovely rural part of England again? And actually, I think enough's enough, and it's time to throw this out. Let them get on with it, whatever they want to do. We have validation to throw it out. We have justification to throw it out, and let a new screening option come forward or whatever. But it is there, and we can throw this down. Thank you very much.
So we move on to Councillor Bunny.
Thank you, Chair. Also say that I am representing points representative for West Windsor District Council, one of the ways there. As you are aware, Egdon was informed in 2020 that this would be the last time they could extend their exploratory planning permission for oil in the North Kelsey area, unless they could provide convincing arguments why they could not complete the project by December 2021. They are back today requesting the extension, citing the second lockdown during the COVID-19 pandemic as a reason. Mr. Chairman, to myself and others, this is not convincing argument. In September 2020, when the last request and final extension decision was made, the world was in uncertain times. A further lockdown possibility, many companies were factoring this into their decision making to keep projects operating. Indeed, Egdon were able to help keep work at their vessel site operating. I suggest that some work could have started on and taking place at North Kelsey, so the current extension request should not, in my opinion, be approved. Each time Egdon has applied for a time extension, they have added minor additions to the operations. At each incremental stage, the planning creep is insignificant, but taken as a whole, that definitely adds up to a major change. On this occasion, the move is to be moved away from bottom hole target drilling to side drilling. The company has negotiated with us about this, with the latter concluding that as there will be little or no change to the surface plans, material planning application is not required. Campaign to Protect Rural England report prepared by KVA Planning is agreed, pointing out that side drilling is likely to have some surface disturbance effects over a wider area than that identified by the vertical bore application. This, along with changes brought about by earlier amendments, substantially changes the project, and therefore this, in my opinion, is a major material change which should be investigated fully. Back in 2014, in every subsequent permission, paragraph 17 of the conditions placed no work restrictions during the bird nesting season to take the various red list species who nest on the site. This would means currently development could not start until September 21, exists eating into the 12-month extension from the date of this planning meeting Egdon had asked for. I appreciate that the 49 week schedule proposed includes time for delay, but I strongly suspect that the embargo during the nesting season adds to the risk of overrun, and yet another request for an extension of the 2020 final extension decision. It should also be noted that a further request allows further planning creep to occur, which is potentially affects on the environment. Clearly, this would be unacceptable, and so the current function period should, in my opinion, once again be turned down. Since 2014, the environment and climate world has changed substantially. Both the UK government and LCC have signed up to net zero carbon by 2050 and adopted green agendas. The UK government has introduced the Environment Act 2021 and is, as LCC, considering various other measures, many of which are in the planning consultative stages. These measures may not yet have been fully adopted or passed into law, but the directive and intention is clear. In particular, there is a clear move away from the dirty, polluting, emitting fossil fuels to clean, renewable energy. Fossil fuels are, in the future, to remain in the ground where they were formed. It is true that the use of fossil fuels will not disappear overnight, but their use will be much reduced. The current Ukrainian situation will, in fact, add to the reduction of use as the rest of the world develops alternative fuels, as it is becomes less reliant on the Russian supplies. North Kelsey is a small field, likely to produce less than 1 day of the UK's oil demand over its 15 to 25 year lifespan, and is therefore considered a small and significant project in terms of total UK usage. However, locally, the project will have significant environmental negative effects for at least the length of the project, and globally, it will add to the carbon emissions. Mr. Chairman, A small, insignificant economic project which has significant negative environmental immediate consequences does not make sense, and so does not merit planning approval, especially as the permission is for the exploration phase only. If oil is discovered, Egon will have to apply for permission for the extraction phase, which current trends by then the regulations to be such, the decision made will definitely be to keep the fossil fuel underground. I therefore ask Chairman, through you, that the committee take the pragmatic decision and follow the spirit of the law as it stands at the moment and turn this extension application down. The suggestion that any available capital will be invested in developing clean, localised, renewable.
Before we move into committee, I'm going to go back to Mr. McBride and ask him if he has any comments so far.
Yeah, just a couple of points. I think obviously a lot of what we've covered from all the speakers. Just in terms of the first speaker and the highways, you'll see in the report there's no highway objection to the proposed development. And when the initial works were undertaken for those highway improvements, they were signed off as being acceptable by the Highway Department. So just want to make it clear that those highway works that have been done have been confirmed as being in accordance with the required scheme. In terms of the CPRE comments and the screening opinion, you'll see in the update that was circulated on Friday my response to those comments. So on the first application for the exploratory borehole extension, you'll see that we did issue a screening response on that and concluded that the development proposed doesn't fall within the definition of environmental impact assessment, which requires an environmental statement. So that application was screened. The second application for the extension of time for the porter cabins to the security reasons, or for those porter cabins to support security staff, we came to the view that because that area is so small that it falls outside the EIA regulations, so it wasn't necessary to undertake a screening opinion on that second application. So I just wanted to make you aware of those 2 points.
Thank you very much. I'm going to open to committee.
Actually, question on clarification, if I might. The issue that you raised there, thank you, was about, I'm looking at is about the highways. Did they make an assessment on the new number of lorries? Because we understand that doing a lateral extended digging will require a different amount of material to come out than if you just went straight down, according to the papers. So presumably the highways would need to make an assessment on the new amount of material that's come out.
The Highways Department looked at it, but in terms of the highway report that was produced, it said that there would be no increase in traffic movements. So they were content looking at all the information and that there wouldn't be any additional impact on the highway safety, even if there was the potential a couple of extra days of work. There wouldn't be those highway improvements that have been undertaken are satisfactory for this application, including both the extension of time and any change that would be caused by the change in the direction of drilling to access another part of the reservoir.
Thank you. So the applicant says there's no change in the amount of material coming out with a different kind of drilling. So presumably, do we have an expert that can check some of the information that we're getting from the applicant? I know, our officers are excellent, but some of this stuff is probably specialists that we may get consultants on.
I think we've got sufficient experience. We've dealt with oil and gas applications for many years, and we're comfortable that we have the experience to scrutinise what the applicant are saying, whether that's robust or not. We are comfortable that the information the applicant has produced is legitimate.
Thank you.
Okay, who's my next speaker, please? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. Several points. Firstly, to reference the terrible events in Ukraine and try and use that as justification in part, although the Chairman clearly stated we use a small amount, I think it's disingenuous. The amount we get or got from Russia for our use is minuscule. Now, if we were Germany, it would matter. The justification or the attempt to justify an extension through COVID also personally to me does not stack up. Whilst they've said they were unable to complete work, highways carried on. There was a lane centre built in Market Rasen from the ground up, from scratch, during COVID. They've had 7 years before COVID, before we even knew what COVID was. And I think as Councillor Martin said, enough's enough now. You've had 7 years. The committee was very clear. That was your last shot. They had ample time before COVID started, before COVID hit this country, to make a start on the groundworks. They did not. And that's enough now. There's no more extension. As far as I'm concerned, they've had their shot many times over. So I can't support the extension, Madam Chairman, and that's enough now.
Thank you for your comments. Councillor Ashton, next, please.
Thank you very much. I'm deeply troubled by this application, and it comes down to a debate in my mind over the principle. And I can't, and I wouldn't seek to comment on geopolitical matters. I wouldn't even seek to comment on the principle of oil exploration in Lincolnshire, because the principle of development of this site has been established by previous decisions of this committee and our predecessors over the last few years. And it does feel to be material that we are talking about a 12-month window in which development would take place. And effectively that 12-month window, it could have taken place at any point over the last 8 years or so. And yet we have a decision, page 34 of our papers at item 5, says that the Planning and Regulation Committee minutes of September 2020 state that the extension improved would be the final extension given by the council unless there were good reasons otherwise. And I would refer to page 57, appendix B, item 1, the conditions on the previous application. Actually, there's conditions on this, but they're the same as what we had before. To provide for the completion of the exploratory operation in the interest of the amenity of the area. So we have basic conditions. There are conditions that have been put on, very clear amenity reasons. And I'm uncomfortable that the reasons that are given for an extension of time are not perhaps as good as what this committee had in mind back in 2020, as Councillor Smith has rightly said. Other construction activities have taken place, other oil exploration work has taken place in Lincolnshire in this time. I am deeply troubled that we have as a committee, as a council, insisted on conditions in the past. Very clear and very good reasons for being asked to set aside those conditions. But I'm equally troubled that we have a principle of permission that has been established, and I am concerned that we would find ourselves unable to defend our position at the field on the basis of that principle having been established. But I'm very interested to hear the debate as it goes. I genuinely have not made my mind upon this because I'm deeply troubled that we have conditions that we are being asked to set aside. There are already works that we've heard in terms of access and that have taken place. And given the sensitivity of this location, it feels right that people locally in that environment has a degree of certainty And I'm not convinced that continuing to extend the time period is going to achieve that. And I shall listen to the rest of the debate.
Any comments from the planning officer?
I think Councillor Ashton has summed it up very, very well.
Thank you, Mr. Tom. So I'll move on to councillor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. To cover a really simple point, I think we need to take account of the meaning of the word finally, because I have heard nothing, is another word that I don't believe we really sort of had substantial changes that justify the delay. I feel we're putting a massive amount of pressure on local residents and their concerns, because this is the beginning of this thing, not the end. So I feel that the end game may be extended and extended and extended. I think we've got to say finally and say that meant finally, which is sort of fairly good clarity, in my opinion. That's my three hangers.
Okay. Anybody else wishing to speak before we introduce Councillor Mrs. Overton? Okay, Councillor Mr.
Thank you very much, Chairman. My first one is just for clarification questions. So this is the first time I'm actually speaking up the issue. Thank you. I did come with open mind, and I've had quite a lot of thoughts, and I think what we've heard today has been very helpful. I think there's been a lot of discussion of what was actually in the pages, and that's helpful. There's a couple of things there. One is that this application to me is quite different. It's going to be using a different area underground, and also it's going to be a different timescale. Now, both of those things are changes. The different area, I think I have to say we've had some answers there already, but thinking about a new timescale, we have had significant changes. We have put forward the environment policy through the County Council. We have made that declaration. We have got the Environment Act and also the local plan. And I know whilst it was said earlier that it isn't properly in place yet, the new local plan, but it has gone through its first consultation and it's gone through the committee. So it is actually, next time it comes out, the consultation goes back, it will be about whether it's actually sound and less about the individual policies. So the policies that are in there have been tested by the public and they are now going out again, but it won't be so much on the individual policies. So I believe that local plan, the central interlocal plan, has actually started to gather some weight. In that local plan, it clearly says that we will not be allowing further extraction. I'm just trying to find the actual page, but it does say that we will not be supporting further fossil fuel extractions. And I think that this has got to that point. They have got to the final decision that we made last time. We said that was going to be the final extension. And now there have been these significant changes which are against reintroducing a further extension, which actually, as has been said, has got to be, it says on page 54 on there that it will have to be produced as a new decision notice with a comprehensive set of conditions. So it will actually be a new application, new decision notice. So I think that this is we have to look at this fresh in the light of the new agreements, legislations, declarations that we've got, and indeed the new local plan. And I think that this situation has now changed. And this is contrary to the new local plan. I'll find the paragraph in a minute. Thank you.
Yeah, a couple of points. So in terms of any additional time, you heard from the applicant who said that this directional drilling might involve an extra couple of days in terms of the operations. So I don't see that is significant, given that the period of time that's been asked for is a year. So 2 days in a year, I don't see a significant amount of change. I would disagree with Councillor Overton a lot on the local plan status. The plan that Councillor Overton was talking about is the Central Lincolnshire plan, which is at the very, very early stages of its evolution through the planning process. And even without getting too much into the debate about the relevant policy that I think Councillor Overton is talking about, that policy acknowledges that, or that draft policy acknowledges that Central Lincolnshire local plan authorities, in terms of West Lindsey, Lincoln City and North West Ealing, are not the mineral planning authority. Lincolnshire County Council is a mineral planning authority, and there's an acknowledgement that the Lincolnshire County Council will produce its own or review its own minerals local plan, and that is a policy which is fundamental in assessing hydrocarbon applications against. So I would disagree completely that there should be any weight at all attached to that policy. I think Councillor Ashton was correct. He said that the acceptance of this application has already been established. What's before the committee today is whether the extension of time that has been asked for, whether that is justified or not. I know there's a temptation to start looking and drilling down into all those other issues, but from a procedural perspective, they're not on the table. What we're looking at is whether it's acceptable for an extension of time to allow this operation to take place.
Thank you. Councillor Ashton.
Thank you. I agree completely with Pride in respect of the Central plan. I'm not as familiar with that process as I am with plans elsewhere in Lincolnshire. But from my understanding, I'd agree completely that it's a far too early stage in its discussion point in order to have a weight. And I'd be reluctant to rely upon that as a reason. The committee reminded to refuse this application. I come back to what I was saying previously. It is absolutely down to the principle of whether it is reasonable or not to allow or otherwise an extension of time, and whether it would be reasonable to refuse it. If it wouldn't be reasonable to refuse it, I have to question whether it was ever reasonable or realistic to put the condition on the previous applications, and because if it isn't reasonable to refuse these applications, are there any circumstances in which we would refuse an extension of time, this time or another time, or are we down to a subjective judgment as to whether the reasons that we have been given are sufficient or not? I mean, at the same time, is it material one way or another, however good those reasons might be, if we're looking at the establishment of principle and whether it's reasonable or not to uphold it?
Comments? To Councillor Smith, I'm sorry, you're a visiting member. Councillor Marford, so I'm not going to introduce you into the debate. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Just to find some clarity on the CLRP point, further to what Mr. Bragg was saying, also Councillor Overton references is actually in dispute. There's been alluded. Is it A, the CLRP is at a very early stage, B, that policy is in dispute. There have been representations made by various individual organisations, etc., with that specific policy in dispute between the MPA, which is the Mineral Planning Authority, and the CLLP. That said, going back to what Councillor Ashton said, there comes a point where we have to say either we have the power to say what we meant, and this is not reasonable, and we're going to do something about it, or we keep nodding through extensions of time. Now, personally, I'm quite happy to propose we refuse an extension of time of both applications because they've had 8 years, and COVID is not, in my opinion, a justifiable reason for an extension of time, and I'm quite happy to propose that.
Thank you. So I can see a note's been passed along from Councillor Marfleet to Councillor Mrs. Overton, who would no doubt like to speak now.
Thank you. I think it is, is there a material change or not is a question. And I was arguing that there is material change, and the policy I was talking about was S20 of the the version draft local plan. But I do take that there's been some discussion about it, and the thing we do agree on is whether it is reasonable or not to extend or not the time available again. So I accept what's been said. And I would just like to say that I think it is entirely unreasonable to extend it yet again from the point of view that where do you have a boundary then, which I think was Councillor Ashton's point. You know, you do have to come to a point where that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to introduce Councillor. You are promoting, I'm not sure. I'm going to introduce our legal representative, Martha, to give a
Thank you, Chairman. Afternoon, members. Just obviously listen to all your debate. I heard everything you said. I would just like to remind members that when we're talking about is it reasonable to extend or not, we're talking about whether it's reasonable in terms of planning to extend. So all your decisions need to come back to material planning considerations, planning policy. Just want to put that in as members continue their debate. Thank you, Chairman.
I'll now go to Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. In fact, Martha just said one of the things that I was going to say. We've heard a great deal about the principle of this development, both from the applicant and from objectors. We've heard about international situations in oil supply, and we've heard about things like climate change and the need to transition away from fossil fuels. And these are very important considerations on both sides. They are not, as far as I can tell, the basis on which we should make this decision. It is very much, as Martha has just reminded us, on material planning considerations in the context of local policy, national guidance, and any overarching regulations. We've heard from Mr. McBride and from you, Chairman, in your introduction, two key factors in making this decision are the impact on the amenities of local people. We've heard one of the objectors speak very eloquently about that, and on the issue of COVID delay. And I refer, as Councillor Ashton has done, to condition 5 of the preceding permission, which refers to this, and I quoted, that the extension if approved should be the final extension given by the council unless, here's the crucial bit in my view, there were good reasons otherwise. Now, that's Mr. McBride at the end of my remarks to comment on that, the power that that phrase, good reasons otherwise, might have. As far as COVID is concerned, I quite understand the point made by the applicant that other industries have managed to carry on. Yes, there have been delays, and big ones. In another authority, I'm responsible for leading a significant local authority building program, many millions of pounds. I understand intimately the impact on that industry of COVID, but we haven't stopped or lost a single project, although there have been delays and supply chain issues, all the things that the applicant reminded us of. Industry in general has somehow carried on. Lots of industries have somehow carried on. We do have a situation here where there is a history of delays. I guess Mr. McBride would say because we must look at this individual delay rather than the cumulative impact. But when we talk about the impact on the amenities of residents, it seems to me that I'm quoting Councillor Ashton here, who had this lovely phrase about the degree of uncertainty which local people have about this scheme. Is that not also an aspect of amenity? I put that as a genuine question because I genuinely don't know the answer. What I'm concerned is that with this individual delay, I'm concerned about whether or not we have sufficient material planning reasons to refuse. But at the same time, looking at that phrase in condition 5, that wants to be the final extension unless there are good reasons otherwise, does that phrase not actually give us the ability to judge whether these reasons are good or not? In which case, given that other industries have managed, yes, with delays, but to continue, this individual project does not seem to have had any physical works done recently. A little bit of highways. I'm assuming, Mr. McBride, that highways work is within the regulations implemented. Yes, so permission is implemented. Yes, they may have done lots of stuff in terms of the technical analysis, and nobody's decrying its importance. But in terms of physical work, we haven't seen anything, whereas other industries have. So my concern, Chairman, is have we really got good enough reasons, as we are required under condition 5 of the preceding application, to support what is proposed today? I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chairman.
Again, I think Councillor Carrington has summed it up really well. I agree with the comment from the legal representative, but obviously this needs to be assessed on material planning considerations. And I said earlier, there's a temptation to start opening up the debate about lots of wider issues, but that's not what the committee is being asked to do today. And I guess that that paragraph that has been referred to from the minutes from the previous meeting when this on these applications were last considered, that the door was left open for a future extension of time if the reasons for that extension of time by the committee are seen to be necessary. And I think that opens the door. So your officer's view is that the reasons set out by the applicant are good enough to warrant an extension of time. What Councillor Ashton asked for, are we almost in a expectation that there would never be a situation where it would be possible to refuse this application? I don't see that that is the situation. If the committee feel that these reasons aren't good enough, then there's no reason, provided that there's a legitimate planning reason set out for that, that the application can be, these applications can be refused if the committee feel that the reasons set by the applicants aren't adequate, then there's no reason, provided there's a legitimate planning reason of making that judgment, there is no reason why the applications can't be refused.
Now, I know a lot of people have spoken already, and some people have had 2 or 3 opportunities. Councillor Smith, I'm going to give you a 3rd opportunity, but unless I start to see new information coming forward, I will be looking to try and put something together very soon. So, Councillor Smith.
Conversely, listen for what you just said, if we judge that it is not a sufficient good enough reason, could we use the condition Councillor Ashton alluded to as a justification in planning terms to refuse it?
I think that in terms of Councillor Carrington was saying, in terms of the effect on people's amenity, there's been some debate over the years as to whether sort of fear, that's a material consideration. So anxiety potentially could be cited as a reason for in terms of people's amenity. Not saying how that would be interpreted, but that's certainly
Okay, so I don't have anybody else wishing to speak. Councillor Scott.
Thank you. I've been listening to the debate intently. And the world has moved on in the last 7 years, even legislation regarding the environment. I'm quite happy to second Councillor Spencer's proposal.
Right, so Councillor, can I go to legal, please? See, I have been waived.
Can I please just ask for clarification of the reasons for refusal? Because when I listened in late, I'm often trying to say to myself what we're refusing from.
Which is where I was going to go back to. I'm going to go
Apologies,
to say exactly why and the logic and ideas. How you put it on the spot.
What Councillor, what Mr. McBride said, certainly DM3, excuse me, because that, in terms of quality, actually says quality of life and community. Quality of life, in my mind, includes being able to live without having something hanging over your head and knowing what is coming around the corner. There is also an issue of amenity, because as Councillor Margaret has eloquently put that, and I've seen this like this, I really expect that it being like that. That is an exceedingly rural area, and it's, yes, it's not in the AONB, but I believe it would have an impact on the AONB. So there is a potential, if members are minded, let me just leave it so to Stephen. but it would also impact the AONB, and it says planning permission will only be granted for minerals and waste development within or affecting the character or setting of the Lincolnshire Wild Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty in exceptional circumstances where it can be demonstrated there is a proven public interest and there is a lack of alternative sites not affecting the AONB to serve the market need. Now, to my mind, I have not seen the justification from the applicant that there are a lack of sites within Lincolnshire that aren't affecting the AONB. There are other sites that are in the minerals and waste plan that don't. I don't believe, due to the small nature and the amount of oil, that it's in the public interest to it either. So I would say there is DM5, DM3, two.
Okay, I'm just going to, I'm going to go to Councillor Skinner and say, are you happy with those reasons?
I'm happy with those, plus the fact they've run out of time a number of times.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to come to Councillor Sear now, who's indicated she was.
Okay. Thank you. I'm newcomer, but I'm sit here and listen to all, question and opinion. But the way I'm feeling, I think, in 2014, these things are going to happen. And nothing happened. I envy you residents to put up with it for all these time, and I think, of course, if you get it, Lincoln got all in the ground, billion, yeah? But maybe a miles of oil, and you put all these people invisible for years, you don't know what happened. That's not right, in my opinion. I think they have their fair share. So that nothing happened, you cannot blame COVID-19, you cannot blame the Ukraine with the oil thing. It's not good enough. So I will support people go against it to extension. I think enough is enough. These people need to sleep people, Thank you.
I'll go back to Mr. McBride now.
Yeah, can I just check in terms of the reference to the Lincolnshire Wild AONB? Have I missed something because the site's not within the Lincolnshire Wild?
No, but it does say that it can, let me find it, it does say that within or affecting the character of. I appreciate it's not in the AONB, but due to its proximity, I believe it will affect the character of the AONB.
Well, yeah, it's once that clarification.
Yeah, that's fine. No.
Going across to legal.
Thank you. If I could just remember to send you back to the point that Mr. McBride said several times, in assessing this application is for an extension of time. So when you're talking about your reasons for refusal need to relate to why the extension of time will now be different on the impact on the community. The principle of development has been stated by officers and council current is established. But what is the changes in this application through the extension of time and the sideways drilling that will impact upon the community for those to be found defendable reasons for an appeal? With that code.
That then now find the condition as well, because I think that's relevant. And also I think condition 1 of 14423 is relevant as well, Chairman. 203. The development hereby committed shall cease on 30th December 2023 by the date all portable buildings, plants and machinery associated with the use hereby committed shall have been removed, the well capped and the land returned to its previous use as agricultural land to provide for completion of exploratory operations in the interest of amenity of the area. I think is relevant because of the time that's elapsed as well, Chair.
Yeah, so I'm a bit seeking clarification here. Obviously, in Appendix B and Appendix C, these are proposed conditions that were recommended by officers. So, in terms of why we would be quoting those in that refusal.
Are they not the conditions from the previous application as well?
Well, they are, but with different dates. Because
yeah.
So perhaps that's one to leave out of any proposal. I'll let you think about it and go to Councillor Carrington whilst you're thinking.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a point which may be helpful to colleagues. This is, of course, for the proposer and seconder to determine what the exact form of words and their reasons are. I was very, very comfortable indeed with the first reason which Councillor Smith put forward, and I think he quoted bang on the policy DM3 is the one that we're concerned about. It may only be me, but I'm much less comfortable with that second slew of reasoning is particularly robust. And it occurs to me that they can, purely my personal opinion, I understand, but we might have a more robust decision and restricted ourselves to that first ground.
Yeah, I think it's the last point. Yeah.
So let's go back to Councillor Smith. Your proposal is just DM3 alone.
Yeah.
Councillor Skinner,
Yes.
your seconding that.
Yes.
Would anybody else like to speak? I'll therefore offer it to a vote. We reject it based on DM3, which does affect the quality of life and the amenity of local residents. That is the proposal that you are putting through, yes?
Yes, the only other thing that's popped into my mind, Chairman, very briefly, is the human rights applications which are relevant to that as well. If members are uncomfortable with that, I'm quite happy to leave it in just a thought process.
I think
Maybe relevant.
we should say that
Yeah, Chairman, this is maybe helping in terms of if you're looking at pension other policy, but in the central function of the plan policy, 26 might be anyone that references immunity. So
that's the current.
Yes.
Yeah. Not the amended one or the one that's currently being consulted on.
Yes.
Clarity. Councillor Smith, are you happy with that?
Yeah, I'm quite happy to thank you.
Councillor Skinner, are you happy?
I am happy.
Legal, are you happy?
Yes, my only clarification is obviously, Chairman, just to remind you that we need to vote on 14203 and then another vote on
Which we're going to do two separate votes. Therefore, we now have a substantial debate over both issues, and I think the proposal will be the same for both of the applications, but it will be two separate votes. So if we take the first vote, which is with regard to 141306, and that is the proposal tabled, all that in favour of Councillor Smith's proposal, please show now. Anybody against? Nobody against. Any abstentions? Therefore, that is carried. I'll therefore go to the other application, which is 141307. Councillor Smith, are you still happy with the proposal? Yes. Councillor Smith, are you still? Thank you. Anybody wish to speak before we put that to the vote? All in favour of the proposal with DM3 and also condition 26 of the current local plan? Please show now. Thank you. Anybody against? Any abstentions? Therefore, that is carried. Thank you very much for a substantial debate. We'll just pause the meeting for a few seconds while we give people the option to leave the room, or you can stay for the time your choice. I'm going to go back to the 2411, which will be the 8607 Main Street group. So, Jan, sorry about the delay. And, you've seen how interested you did think.
More exciting.
I promise you got the hour and a half on this debate.
Thank you, Chairman. So the first report relates to a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit on the A607. Next slide, please. Park Street lies just to the north of Grantham on the A607 to Lincoln. Next slide, please. Councillor Moore represented the Parish Council request a 30 mile an hour limit to replace the existing 40 mile an hour limit. It was assessed purely in terms of mean speed of traffic, given that it meets the criteria on development grounds. Mean speeds average came in 35.5, which enables it to be considered as a borderline case. Recommendation is that the committee approves a school reduction so that we can begin the consultation process on it.
Thank you very much. Councillor Pepper wishes to speak.
Just to say, Chairman, I've kept quiet so far. It's perfect sense to me. I'm happy to move it.
Quite happy secretary.
Right, people seconding, all in favour, please show now. Next one will be to take to the A52 at slide 10.
Thank you, Chairman. Next slide, please. So this relates to a new speed limit for 50 mile an hour limit on the A52, Abbey Lane at Drayton, Swansea Head. Next slide, please. It's a new limit, so it's been assessed against the criteria, which isn't met on development grounds, but as it's been assessed as a rural limit, which means we take into account the traffic flow and a given length and number of accidents. This was brought to us by the Ministry of Road Safety Partnership. There have been 6 reported injury collisions in the vicinity of the Staggard Junction there between Blackjack Road and the Drayton. The assessment gains an accident rate of 37, which means it can be justified against the policy. And we have received a number of objections, basically asking that we reduce the limit to less than 50 miles per hour. Given that the mean speeds are 47, that complies with the level required for a 50 mile an hour limit. So we cannot reduce any further. This is explained why in the report, and we didn't meet our criteria. Also been asked to extend the limit further southwards to include the roundabouts, but again, the report describes why this isn't feasible and explains the rationale why we have placed the start of the 50 on the exit from the roundabout to enable drivers to manage that speed. The recommendation is that the objections are overruled so that we can introduce this orders as advertised.
Councillor Skinner.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm quite happy to support this improvement, although it's not as much as the residents would really like. I know it's not my area either, but it's either that or you decide to skip on these corners at this time of year. It really is that bad. And anything we can do in making it safe, in the reduction, quite happy to support. Thank you.
Very much. Councillor Ashton.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Nobody wishing to speak. All in favour, please show now. Unanimous. Anybody against? Any abstentions? Thank you. Faithful. 4.3.
Chairman, this relates to waiting restrictions in the Stock Clearways at High Street and K4. Next slide, please. This was brought before the committee last July, where objections to the proposed restrictions as shown in Appendix A were overruled, and subsequently we advertised the proposal and received further objections, in particular related to the restrictions proposed at the junctions of South Parade and High Street. So we've got 6 objections to those restrictions on the basis that they affect the local business, restrict parking for residents, also an additional request for them to be extended further southwards to facilitate access and ingress into properties on High Street. During the consultation, we received no objections from the Stockley consultees and the letter of support from Stagecoach. The parish council is in support, as is the local member. We believe that the restrictions are required at that junction to improve safety for pedestrians and vehicles in traffic, and recommend therefore that the objections are overruled and the orders advertised is introduced.
Thank you. Now, at some stage, we did have a local member wanting to talk to us. I don't know if he's still available. Oh, hi, Alex.
Hello, Chairman. I am here. Hello. You kept me waiting, didn't you? Yes. Thank you. I wanted to speak today in support of the officer recommendation to overrule the objections that were received during the consultation on this. The proposals here for High Street actually form part of a package of measures that were agreed with Highways some years ago to reduce traffic congestion and improve safety on High Street. So the first phase of that was actually putting some parking spaces on Back Lane behind the school to resolve some of those school parking issues. And this is obviously the second phase of that package of measures, which will help free up the High Street, remove parked vehicles from it and allow buses to safely pass through without getting stuck and having to turn around. So it's quite an important scheme and one I strongly support. The measures did come as a result of a site visit with the local school and the local parish council. Both bodies have been supportive of this scheme. I note there have been some objections, mostly relating really to that junction that Jan mentioned, South Parade Junction, where the shop is. And I think anyone that's visited Caythorpe and seen that junction, really, it's not a safe place to park anyway. And there is ample parking further down south on High Street for anybody that needs to drive to the shop. And of course, anybody with mobility issues or blue badge could park on the double yellows anyway. So I'm quite confident that we can mitigate those problems and overcome them. But I recognise that the owners are concerned that there might be an impact on them. And I think, as Jan mentioned as well, Stagecoach are supportive of this. Not only does it remove the parking issues at the pinch point of the village, we're also adding some bus clearways as well to make sure that all bus pickup points in the village are clear of parked vehicles. And I would very much appreciate the committee's support with this scheme today. Thank you.
Comments? I'm quite happy to propose them. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Skinner. Would anybody like to speak to the application? If not, everybody in favour, please show. Anybody against? Abstentions? That's therefore carried and granted. Thanks, Alex, for hanging on. It's very much appreciated. Okay, so thanks very much, Jan, for waiting and the interesting debates that you've had. I'm sure that it will be a bit more succinct than the previous one. I'll move you on then to Mr. Willis. Application 6.1.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's a slightly different report, actually. It's not an application, a report dealing with a planning application, but rather a report that's seeking the committee's authority for us to bear a prohibition order in relation to a quarry site known as Tetford Hill Quarry in the AONB. The purpose of the report really is it sets out some of the background as to why the prohibition order is deemed or felt necessary to be pursued. The background to the case and the reasons for the duty that's now placed on the authority to consider that. By way of background, the Tetford Hill Quarry is a historic chalk quarry that was granted back in the 1940s under an IDO regime. And common with many existing quarries, went through required to be reviewed in terms of the planning conditions. It underwent a review in the early 90s and was due a second review in 2008, which was to look at the working conditions and operations affecting that site. For various reasons, the then operator had sought to delay the review of the quarry. The site, whilst was identified as active, hadn't actually been operating for a number of years. And so the county agreed to defer that review process and at that same time secure the 106 agreement, which in effect prevented the site operating until a formal review had taken place. And the reason for that was because of the sensitivity of the site. As I say, it had been dormant effectively for a number of years and it is within the AONB, so it was felt necessary to ensure protections were in place to prevent any work until that site was properly reviewed and scrutinised. Since then, 2008, the site was sold to a new owner, and that new owner sought to review the quarry back in 2014, submitted an environmental statement, and that application started to go through the process. However, because it was an environmental impact assessment, the work that was carried out wasn't sufficient for us to enable to make an informed judgment in terms of the acceptability of the working scheme. Various notices were served seeking further information, and they were not complied with. Now, the government had introduced provisions in relation to specifically sites such as this, which had, if sites were operating under an old permission, continuing to operate, then the authorities could potentially put them into automatic suspension. And the idea behind that was that clearly if a site's operating under old conditions, quite sensitive, then there may be a need to make sure operations are suspended until the site's been properly reviewed. So you'll see in the report that under the provisions they effectively kicked in 2015, which required a suspension of operations. And then the applicant had 2 years to comply with that notice to provide the information, or at that point, the environmental regulations require us to consider making a prohibition order. So it's a bit of background, but it is important because in terms of making the authority to be able to seek a prohibition order, we need to be confident that the development is by definition permanently ceased. And if those tests have been met, then the authority then can go forward and seek that order. And that order basically puts a red line that nullifies the previous permission and any prospect of any future working taking place. So in the report, it sets out the tests and the consideration of the tests to decide whether or not we feel as officers the operations can be squarely deemed permanently ceased. And the two tests principally that have been looked at there is whether the site's been suspended for 2 years and failure to provide the information that's required, and that the prohibition order therefore is capable of being served. And on page 70, you'll see there's some commentary there in relation to those two tests. In essence, basically the site, given its sensitivity and its poor quality of chalk, there's been an evidence of a lack of market need for the site, which arguably was the reason why the previous operator didn't take forward the review in 2008. And as a consequence of that, even then with the new site owner on board, there's been no appetite or desire to work with the authority in responding to requests for information to make sure that the permission can be reviewed appropriately. So there's been no substantial extent of mineral working for more than 2 years. Our records certainly suggest not since the early 90s, it's arguably even way before then. In terms of evidence of whether there's a likelihood of a resumption of mineral extraction, well, as I say, the regulations have also in effect put the site into automatic suspension. That period for compliance under regulation 49 of the EIA regs has now ceased. And under the terms, there's now a duty for the authority to serve a prohibition notice. And in terms of the timeframe or ability to serve that, to submit the information, the officer's view is that there's been no appetite to do so. As I say, the applicant submitted in 2014, was given till 2015 to submit the information, then till 2017. And then upon notification from that, we've heard no further information. So in short, we are satisfied that there's now grounds and reasons to justify the serving of a prohibition order. There is a 106 in place that in effect stops any working taking place anyway, and that is legally enforceable and still in place. However, the prohibition order is a definitive tool and makes it clear that there's no such operations can take forward. So the recommendation or what the report is effectively asking is that the committee is satisfied with the reasons that have been set out in the report for justification of serving an order, and therefore the officers being given the powers to take that forward. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very happy to support the report and recommendations. Just having a glance on my screen, thanks to Apple Maps, I can see the state of the site. And my hand is on curling, doesn't look like it's been touched for a considerable period of time. Clear from the report that every effort has been made, except on the part of the owners to do something with it. So I'm quite content that we've followed every procedure we've needed to have to move the recommendation.
Thank you. I'll second it. Maybe you want to speak to the application? Okay, maybe we should please now comments. Proposed and seconded, all in favour of anybody against? Abstentions? Thank you. Thank you very much. Right, so now, Article 6.